Housing Works, and there were like 1,000 people there.
Oh no, it seems there's another application open in the background. If everyone could just close the applications. Do you have any? Do you have any other pages open in your background?
I mean, I have my notes up, but I don't have any browsers up or anything.
Okay, I think Jean, I think it's coming from you. Do you have any other browser pages?
No.
Okay.
Did it stop?
No.
Yes. Okay, we're good.
All right.
We're good, everyone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Maggie, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this virtual event with Jean Hanff Korelitz in conversation with Meghan Daum discussing the plot. We're so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring our authors and their works to our community during this time. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn about them on our website, booksoup.com, as well as our social media at BookSoup. Our next event is tomorrow, May 12th, with Joel Selvin discussing Hollywood Eden, electric guitars, fast cars, and the myth of the California Paradise, in conversation with Roy Trakin and special guests. To submit a question during the event, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list that you'd like our speakers to answer, please click the like button. We'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Please do not use the sidebar chat to ask a question. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button that reads the plot directly below the viewer's screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. These copies will come with signed book plates while supplies last. We're also selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro FM and Kobo for those who are interested. A little more about Jean. Jean is the author of the novels You Should Have Known, which was adapted for HBO's The Undoing, which also starred Nicole Kidman, Hugh Grant, and Donald Sutherland. Admission, adapted in 2013, starring Tina Fey. The Devil and Webster, The White Rose, The Sabbath Day River, and a jury of her peers. A little more about Meghan. Meghan is the author of 5 books, including the brand new The Problem with Everything, My Journey Through the New Culture Wars. Her last book was the collection of original essays, The Unspeakable and Other Subjects of Discussion, which won the 2015 Penn Center USA Award for Creative Nonfiction. She's also the editor of the New York Times bestsellers, Selfish, Shallow, and Self-Absorbed, 16 writers on the decision to not have kids. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to Jean and Meghan. Enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Maggie. I'm excited to be here with Book Soup. I think Book Soup was the first, when my very first book came out, My Misspent Youth in 2001. I think Book Soup was the first reading I did on my little tour. So I'm always happy to be with Book Soup. Anyway, Jean, congratulations. Today is your pub day. Is this your official launch?
What's that?
Is this your official launch? You're on book tour now.
This is our maiden voyage.
Are you super jet lagged?
Yeah, it's been awful. It's just
horrible.
It's just like a number of airports, just horrible.
Do you like this? Like, it must be disappointing to not like be able to go places, but is it like a little bit of a relief too? Like, how does it feel to be doing this?
It's not a relief because the truth is I've never actually been on a book tour. I've never been sent on a book tour. Yeah. I cannot overstate how obscure my career as a writer has been until Nicole Kidman 6 months ago. But I mean, for my last book, I flew myself to a few cities and slept on my friends' couches and gave readings with about 5 people in the audience, often including the person I was staying with, which was very embarrassing. But I mean, it's been a dream to one day go out there, in some kind of organized way. And that is not this, but this is great, and I'm happy.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how these evolve if the whole nature of these things change. Anyway, well, I have to say I finished the novel this afternoon, partly because I was like going so slowly. I didn't want it to end. This is such a page turner. you're not only a gifted literary writer, but you have the skill that most of us do not, which is that you can craft a story that has these twists and turns, but keeps moving at a really swift pace. So I guess my first question is, have you always been able to write like this, or is this book a departure for you in terms of tone?
One of the nice things about having the kind of long career that I've been lucky enough to have is that you do get to learn with every book. You do get to get better with every book. And when I was starting out in the 1980s and failing to get published, I was very jealous of my contemporaries who were kind of rushing into print, leaving me in the dust. And it was a time when people were writing novels about getting high in nightclubs and stuff. That's not what I was writing about, but they were doing very, very well, and I was not. And it's amazing to fast forward all these years later, and most, not all, but most of those writers have disappeared. And here I am, geriatrically crossing the finish line with 7 novels. And I can't quite believe it's happened, but I guess this is a real kind of, what's the grasshopper and the frog? Or no, it's not the grasshopper and the frog, it's the rabbit.
The tortoise and the hare?
I am the tortoise. The tortoise, c'est moi.
So you wrote this. We're going to obviously hear about what it's about, and you're going to read for a little bit. But you wrote this during the beginning. You started it during the beginning of lockdowns, during COVID. So you actually did the thing that everyone is now beating themselves up for not having done, which is actually completed a project. How did you write this so fast? Did you have an outline? Like, how did it emerge?
No, I mean the story is, and I think my editor might be on this call, so she can confirm the details. But I had been working for quite some time on another novel that is very different from the plot, and it's a big kind of unwieldy book with a lot of protagonists, and it was just not quite there. And we had gone through a couple of rounds of uncomfortable editorial meetings in which she said to me, "I'm not buying this book yet. You have to do another draft." And it was in the midst of one of these meetings that I just kind of heard myself say, "But I have another idea." And I barely had this idea. I mean, I think I'd gotten the idea the day before, and I had never said it out loud, and I'd never described the book. But there I was in the midst of this meeting describing this book that I wanted to write. And what happened was that we agreed that I would put aside the other book, which I clearly needed some distance from, and write this instead. And a few weeks later, everything shut down. So there I was, in my case, in a very isolated house with my husband, and just super scared. And I'm not saying that lightly. I mean, I was very, very scared, and not leaving the house. And it was just a kind of a perfect storm of circumstances to write a book. And that's what I did. And I didn't really do anything else. I watched,
Were you watching the news?
Enough to know that I had been right for months when I had been scared about this thing that was happening in China. And I mean, people didn't quite believe me for being as scared as I was. And they were sort of saying, well, it's going to be like SARS, and the mortality is very low, and it won't come here. And, I've read too many novels to feel that way.
Right.
And not just novels. I mean, I read Laurie Garrett's book, The Coming Plague, 20 years ago. I've been scared since reading that book. I won't go to post-apocalyptic movies. I'm too scared. So I really was not psychologically in shape to do anything but write a thriller.
Okay. Well, and it's remarkable that this story just came to you as if you're channeling something. And the book is, I mean, it obviously you came up with it. I'm not taking the credit away. I'm not giving credit to like a ghost, but so the story is about a writer, sort of had early success, and he's become like a sort of mid-list, teaching at MFA programs. We're familiar with this type, and he he hears a story, he hears somebody else tell a story that is not his own. So why don't you tell us a little bit, kind of give us an overview of the story, and then I want to have you read for a little bit. And everyone, just so you know, we're gonna I'm gonna take questions for the last 20 minutes or so. So at about half past the hour, I'm gonna remind you to start your questions in the chat. So
I never did an MFA, but I did try to teach once. I'm the first person to tell everybody I'm not a gifted teacher. And even in my little class that I taught back many, many years ago, there was one guy in the class who just basically sat there like this. And the vibe from him was, who the hell do you think you are? And I've come to believe that guy's pretty much in every class.
Yes.
So, right. Maybe the name's changed, but it's the same guy. And this is about a kind of a failed writer named Jake, and he's teaching in this, 10th rate MFA program, a low residency MFA program. And into his class comes this jerk off guy. His name is Evan, and he basically says, you have nothing to teach me besides I am writing a book that is foolproof. Everybody's going to buy it. It's going to be made into a movie. Oprah's going to pick it. All the things are going to happen to it. And Jake thinks, yeah. But then in their conference together with just the two of them in the room, this student tells him the plot of this book. And Jake knows. He knows this asshole has absolutely got that plot. And it's a shame, but there are rules about that. And, so he just resigns himself to this guy becoming undeservedly a massive success. And it goes on that way for a couple of years when he realizes one day that, this book is not materialized. Where is it? And he does a little research, and what he discovers is that the guy died. And he died pretty soon after their encounter. He did not publish. He probably didn't finish the book. Maybe he never wrote another word after that conference. So suddenly he's got a bit of a moral dilemma, what to do. And what he does sets into motion everything that happens next. And it's quite a ride. There's, in one sense, it's a moral exploration of where stories come from and who they belong to, but the idea that there's somebody out there who knows what he did is so terrifying to him that he almost can't enjoy the success that he's about to experience.
And this becomes a huge, huge success. Let's be clear about this. This novel comes out, and he's like, it's Oprah, it's the covers of magazines, it's every single. I think.
Yeah,
I think
the guy says.
Yeah,
but it comes through for him.
Right. So okay, well, so Jean, read us a little bit. Give us a taste.
Well, this is an excerpt that basically happens at this very moment when Jake has to decide what he's going to do with this information, and it's a bit of a crossroad for him. It's a moral crossroad in which his moral compass as a person and as a writer kind of come into direct conflict. So this is a brief excerpt about that. Stories are maddeningly elusive. There is no deep mine of them to blast around in, or a big box store with wide aisles of unused, undreamed of, and thrillingly new narratives for a writer to push a big empty shopping cart through, waiting for something to catch their eye. But every now and then, some magical little spark flew up out of nowhere and landed in the consciousness of a person capable of bringing it to life. This was occasionally called inspiration, though inspiration was not a word writers themselves tended to use. Those magical little sparks tended not to waste time in declaring themselves. They woke you up in the mornings with an annoying tap tap and a sense of unfolding urgency, and they hounded you through the days that followed. The idea, the characters, the problem, the setting, lines of dialogue, descriptive phrases, and opening sentence. To Jake, the word that comprised the relationship between a writer and their spark was responsibility. Once you were in possession of an actual idea, you owed it a debt for having chosen you and not some other writer. And you paid that debt by getting down to work. not just as a journeyman fabricator of sentences, but as an unshrinking artist ready to make painful, time-consuming, even self-flagellating mistakes. Rising to this responsibility was a matter of facing your blank page or screen and muzzling the critics inside your head, at least long enough for you to get some work done, all of which was profoundly difficult and none of which was optional. What's more, you stepped away from it at your peril, because if you failed in this grave responsibility, you might well find after some period of distraction or even less than fully committed work that your precious spark had left you. Gone, in other words, as suddenly and unexpectedly as it had appeared, and your novel along with it, though you might spin your wheels for a few months or a few years or the rest of your life, hopelessly throwing words onto the page or screen in a stubborn refusal to face what had happened. And there was something else, an extra dark superstition for any writer hubristic enough to ignore the spark of a great idea, even if that writer was not of a religious bent, even if he did not believe that everything happens for a reason, even if indeed he resisted magical thinking of every other conceivable kind. The superstition held that if you did not do right by the magnificent idea that had chosen you among all other writers to bring it to life, that great idea didn't just leave you to spin your stupid and ineffectual wheels, it actually went to someone else. A great story, in other words, wanted to be told. And if you weren't going to tell it, it was out of here. It was going to find another writer who would, and you would be reduced to watching somebody else write and publish your book. Intolerable. Once long ago, Jake had done his best to honor what he'd been given. He had recognized his spark and done right by it, never shirking the hard thinking and the careful writing, pushing himself to do well and then to do better. He had pursued no shortcuts and evaded no effort. He had taken his chance against the world, submitting himself to the opinions of publishers, reviewers, and ordinary readers, but favor had passed over him and moved on to others. What was he to do? Who was he to be if no other spark ever came to him again? It was unbearable to contemplate. Good writers borrow, great writers steal, Jake was thinking. That ubiquitous phrase was attributed to T.S. Eliot, which didn't mean Eliot hadn't himself stolen it. But Eliot had been talking perhaps less than seriously about the theft of actual language, phrases and sentences and paragraphs, not of a story itself. Besides, Jake knew, as Eliot had known, as all writers ought to know, that every story, every single work of art, from the cave paintings to whatever was playing at the Park Theater in Cobleskill to his own puny books, was in conversation with every other work of art, bouncing against its predecessors, drawing from its contemporaries, harmonizing with the patterns, all of it. Paintings and choreography and poetry and photography and performance art and the ever-fluctuating novel was whirling away in an unstoppable spin art machine of its own, and that was a beautiful, thrilling thing. He would hardly be the first to take some tale from a play or a book, in this case a book that had never even been written, and create something entirely new from it. Miss Saigon from Madame Butterfly, The Hours from Mrs. Dalloway, The Lion King from Hamlet, for goodness sake. It wasn't even taboo, and obviously it wasn't theft. Even if Parker's manuscript actually existed at the time of his death, Jake had never seen more than a couple pages of the thing, and he remembered little of what he had seen. Surely what he himself might make from so little would belong to him and only to him. These, then, were the circumstances in which Jake found himself that January evening at his computer in his cruddy Cobleskill apartment in the leather-stocking region of upstate New York, out of pride, hope, time, and, he could finally admit, ideas of his own. He hadn't gone looking for this. He had upheld the honor of writers who listened to the ideas of other writers and then turned responsibly back to their own. He had absolutely not invited the brilliant spark his student had abandoned, involuntarily abandoned, to come to him. But come it had, and here it was, this urgent, shimmering thing, already tapping in his head, already hounding him, the idea, the characters, the problem. So what was Jake going to do about that? A rhetorical question, obviously. He knew exactly what he was going to do about that.
Thank you. So one of the things that Jake likes to tell his students is that there's like, there are only like 5 stories, like, you know, in terms of literary tropes, like
there are 7 established plots.
Right. Okay. So the hero's journey, rags to riches is one of them. What are the other ones? You know,
the Holdings Roman, Voyage and Return, the Slaying the Monster, comedy and tragedy. But greater mine have. You know.
So do you believe that? And whether or not you believe that, what do you think makes a good story? Like, why was this story that Jake was presented with so much better than his established storylines? Like, what was the secret sauce there?
Well, this is a bit of a challenge because we can't obviously say.
No, we're not going to get, no, right. We're not going to, in the most general sense.
I will say that I read a lot of books. I mean, I keep track of my reading on Goodreads. I don't do a lot of interacting on Goodreads, but I love to kind of look at my virtual bookshelves. I've probably read over 2,000 novels, and I have never seen this in a novel. What is in Jake's plot is not something I have seen. It may exist. I mean, I may have read 2,000 novels. There are plenty more than 2,000 out there. But I think there's something so deeply disturbing about the idea in this story that everybody who hears it goes, yeah, that's a winner. So, yeah, I mean, that's all I can say. I haven't come across it. And so that was the reaction that I had. It sort of popped into my head, and then the whole story kind of organized itself around that.
And so, well, and then the obvious question is, if that's such a great story, why didn't you just make that your book? Why did you go the extra step of doing this book about the story?
I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, I've always been fascinated by liars. I mean, liars are the connective tissue in all of my books, which tend to be very different from one another. I mean, I wanted to write a campus novel. I wrote a campus novel. I wanted to write a legal thriller. I wrote a legal thriller. I wanted to write a kind of comedy of manners. I wrote that. But the liars there's always a liar, at least one. And for writers, lying is usually about plagiarism. And you know, we have a horror of plagiarism. The idea that that somebody would take our words, but even almost as bad that we would take somebody's words inadvertently.
By accident. Oh, yeah.
Which happens. And for example, there was, you know, I have one foot in the poetry world. I used to be a poet. I'm married to a poet. There was an incident a long, long time ago with a very famous magazine that I will not name that published a poem where, and immediately after the publication, people started writing into the magazine to say, you know, that's Elizabeth Bishop. That's an Elizabeth Bishop.
Oh, I remember that.
And,
wait, we don't know what magazine that was?
Well, you know, it was a magazine from the city in which we are that maybe bears its name. But the thing was that when the poet was confronted with this fact, he, as I remember the story, he said that he was unaware that this was Elizabeth Bishop's poem. He had found it in an old notebook. He thought he had written it. He made a few changes and sent it into the magazine. And I believe him. I believe him because that is how we roll. You know, we process words, we process language, we write it down because we like it. And we like it so much we thought we wrote it. And I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't absolutely conscious acts of plagiarism, but I think there's a lot, for those of us who read and have read for decades, there's a lot of stuff in there rattling around, and we don't always know where it came from. So
yeah, I mean, I guess I can't imagine not recognizing my own words, but at the same time, if you pull out something that you think you wrote 20 years ago, I could see that happening. Like, oh, I wasn't half bad back then.
Exactly. I'm sure that this poor guy, you know, whose career as a poet anyway, I'm not sure what he's doing now, but I'm sure it was over and out when that happened. And he probably didn't do anything that, you know, many of us wouldn't have done. So, I mean, I think there's a fear that we're plagiarizing at all times. I know I have it. So, I mean, this is something that I've kind of nursed along for a long time.
Right. So one of the really interesting things you do in the book is you use as interstitials excerpts from the novel that the narrator, the main character, Jake, wrote. The novel's called The Crib. Crib? Crib.
Yeah.
Crib. Okay.
Is another word for still.
Yeah. So what was it like to take on the voice of him as a writer? Is he different from you? Like, do you think he's a good writer? Were you kind of sending up his prose in moments?
Actually, it was a question whether to make him and to make the person, Evan, his student who's died, a good writer, a bad writer. And my friend Debbie, who I think is actually on this call, said, no, he has to be a good writer, because he may feel that you can kill a book, that you can't kill a plot this great, but in fact, bad writing can kill a plot this great. So he had to be a good writer. The short answer is I did not want to write the chapters, and my editor made me. And she was right. Of course, I was trying to shirk my responsibilities, and I had heard an interview with Lily King exactly at the time that I was facing this decision. And Lily King, in her novel Writers and Lovers, had gotten out of writing the chapters of her writer protagonist was writing, because she very reasonably thought, I'm writing a book about a writer who writes a book that everybody wants to publish. There is nothing that I can write that will be good enough for the reader of my novel to say, oh, gee, now I can see that everybody would want to publish that book. So she just didn't write it. And I thought, oh, great, I don't have to write it either, but I did.
Well, and one of the things that Evan says when he's he doesn't even pitch it, he reluctantly shares the story, is he says, this story is so good that not even bad writing could ruin it, could mess it up. But it sounds like you don't believe that. Like, is there any such thing as a story so great that atrocious writing would still would still do it justice?
In a way, it's sort of not for me to answer that question. I think there have probably been, actually, I can think of a few of them, some extremely successful novels, suspense novels, that I did not think were particularly well written. It seems not to have harmed them that much. But I know that I would have stopped reading even Evan's book if it hadn't been written.
Yeah.
I guess.
All right. We're going to start taking questions in about 10 minutes. So you guys, I hope you can hit the ask a question button, and I'll see I will read your questions, and in the order I will take them, or I will at least see them in the order that they're appearing. So I'll start doing that in about 10 or 12 minutes or so. So get ready. There was something sort of remarkable you said at the in the acknowledgments. You write, the plot may seem a little hard on writers, but that shouldn't surprise anyone. We're hard on ourselves. In fact, you couldn't hope to meet a more self-flagellating bunch of creatives anywhere. So you really have a lot of fun with this world of the MFA program and these people. It's like, I especially these low residency programs, I've taught in them, and it can be wonderful, but there are also moments where you're asking yourself if it's really ethical to be encouraging people to be writers, especially if they're paying money to do so. What do you make of this whole world of teaching writing and MFA programs? I mean, I know your husband was taught creative writing at Princeton for a long, long time.
Still does.
Yeah, taught some
Manchester University in the UK. Although he did not go that route himself. I don't think the MFA programs existed when he was at university. But I think my feelings about the programs were formed way before I even wrote a word of fiction. Back in the 80s, I was writing poetry, and I was studying in England, and I heard about this essay that Donald Hall had written in the Kenyon Review, sort of taking on the MFA programs. And his complaint, this was 1983, was that the MFA programs, on the poetry side at least, were producing what he called the McPoem. That they were sort of churning out many pretty good poets. And my memory of the content of this, the argument in this essay, was that all of this pretty good poetry was making it harder for people to find the one or two in each generation who was Keats. And therefore, would those who were not Keats please stop writing? And people were very, very upset about this essay. I mean, because the argument of the MFA programs, which were new at that time, was anybody can be a writer. And if you spend the time and the effort and the devotion and the apprenticeship and all of that, you too can be a writer. And what came out of these programs was a kind of turning out of MFAs who were then capable of teaching in other MFA programs. So it was a kind of constant conveyor belt of this. I don't want to seem as holier than thou about this. I spent 2 years sitting, in a graduate program that I wasn't going to use to teach. I needed that 2 years to read a lot of books and think a lot about what I wanted to do. And I was fortunate that I was able to take that time. So it's not like I was working in the mines while everybody else was getting their MFA. I was indulging, my wish to be a writer in a different way. But I think, the best of the programs are great and the worst of them are not so great.
So you actually got an MFA yourself? No, oh, no, yeah, right, you didn't. So what kind of graduate program were you in?
I went to Cambridge for 2 years, and I did this ridiculous thing it wasn't ridiculous. I did this, ridiculous sounding thing that Americans often do at Oxford and Cambridge, which is get what they call a second BA, which then by some Cambridge magic turns into a master's. But since I wasn't going to teach, it was irrelevant. It really was just what they say about the MFA programs. It was 2 years to sit and read and think and write. And that's just what I used it for.
I want to explore this moral question. I mean, you mentioned it toward the beginning, like, what is the difference between doing something like what this character did and what Jane Smiley did with 1,000 Acres, and King Lear? Like, how do you what's kind of the literary and moral calculus of this? We're constantly borrowing classic stories.
Yeah.
So how
classic stories, and I've done it too. I mean, I've written 2 novels that were based on earlier texts. My novel, The White Rose, was based on De Rosenkavalier, the Strauss opera, which was in turn based on I believe, an 18th century French novel. I also wrote a novel called The Sabbath-day River, which was largely based on The Scarlet Letter. I think this is so in bounds that it's a good thing. I think this is playing with ideas and repurposing stories and then changing them and embroidering them. I mean, just look at, from Homer, from the Odyssey, to James Joyce's Ulysses, to Charles Fraser's Cold Mountain. These are, I mean, who's gonna put their foot down and say, no, you're not allowed? I think it's a great thing, just like in that passage. I mean, this is a beautiful, this is the transmutation of stories and ideas. This is what we're here for. However, what he does, it's not that he thinks he's done something wrong. It's that he thinks he will be seen as having done something wrong. And he is so afraid of the censure, which he knows is out there. Even before he gets the first hint that somebody out there knows what he did and they're coming for him, which is what, a lot of the suspense has to do with. He knows how the world will see him. He knows how the world saw James Fry, who basically, stole from himself. That
right.
Should be, but it wasn't. So that's his fear.
But what is the difference though? Is the difference, if somebody has a story and there are specific characters, that's different from a general idea, like taking something from Hamlet. You don't have a character named Hamlet. You have not done that. So would there have been a way for Jake to have taken this story and kind of sort of mushed it up in such a way that it would have been okay? Was there any way he could have gotten away with this? Like,
the circumstances and the fact that somebody died before the story came into his possession,
right,
really kind of banjaxed him, to use an Irish word. I think he knew that he was in the hole morally, even though he was able to justify it to himself. So that was the problem for him.
Have there ever been stories that you want to tell that are other people's stories, like things that happened to people you know or anything like that you've said, well, I can't do that?
It's a great question. I'm not a writer who is just coming down with stories all the time. I mean, there are people who are, they've got 8 in the hopper at any time. They've got 1,000 in notes. I have one at a time. And I'm lucky if it's a good one. So like right now, I'm not sitting with, 10 ideas.
But you've got another book coming out already next year, I saw.
Oh, I've got the book that I was working on before that I am now making a lot better. Yeah, I mean, I'm the kind of person who thinks about something for 20 years and then I sit down and write a book about it. So I've never been tempted by somebody else's story.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you count Der Rosenkavalier, which, is just a story that I absolutely loved.
Right.
I by that. And I figured Richard Strauss was dead, and so what?
But like if somebody, because I get this a lot with students, they feel they're writing a family story. I mean, this happens in nonfiction more. This is a slightly different kind of question, but something that happens to their mother or something, they feel that they're not entitled to tell somebody else's story. Even if that person is in their family or that person has a relationship to that person's story has a relationship to their own story. So it really has to be their version of events, but it's hard. There's a fine line there. And it takes a great deal of craft to be able to kind of frame your story in such a way that you are telling your version of events, as opposed to just really blatantly trying to tell somebody else's story,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where the line is. I really don't. I mean, I think a lot of us are kind of thrashing around with a certain amount of self-doubt and yet responsibility to the kind of imperative that was in that excerpt. When you have that idea, it is the most important thing in your life. Just like when I had this idea for this novel, for the plot, and suddenly, I was holding it in my hands and blowing on it in the middle of a pandemic for 4 months, however long it took me to write that draft.
It took you 4 months to write this?
I'm afraid so. But I wasn't doing anything else,
Yeah.
Maybe I watched Jake Tapper every night for a few minutes.
Who does okay, well. All right, we do have some questions. So yeah, there's one question here. So other people, feel free to ask. So this is coming from Christina. Yeah, well, this kind of touches on what we're talking about. How was it writing a book within a book? What was the process like? I mean, did you ever get confused? Did you have notes? Were you doing like the note card shuffling around thing?
I had a Google spreadsheet with, a timeline. The timeline was so precise because, well, what you'll know when you read the book, how absolutely important everybody's story and age had to be. But, there were multiple versions of the story. There was the real story. There's a character who lies about their story. There's Jake's version of the story. And then there's Evan's version of the story to the extent that we see it. And it all had to fit together. And yes, I got very neurotic about my Google spreadsheet.
I mean, there are also just little crumbs here and there, like things that you don't realize at the end. Somebody said earlier that this fits in like a jigsaw puzzle. Do you find yourself adding those things in later, kind of layering those details in, or did you have it all kind of planned?
No. I mean, my feeling about planning ahead is that you need to know a certain amount. You need to know, if you want to put a percentage on it, maybe 60, 70%. But if you know more than that, it becomes, you're just connecting the dots. And there's a kind of staleness that comes from that. that I would feel as the writer, and I bet you would feel as the reader. So when I say I told my editor the story in her office in the middle of this depressing meeting about the other book, I told her maybe half of what's in this novel. Enough to be going on with, but not the whole thing, because I didn't know the whole thing. So it's a wonderful feeling when things come into focus as you move through the story. You have a solution, and you have a problem, and then suddenly you see the solution. It's not to say I didn't get things wrong. I had to unravel the whole middle of the book at one point and go back and try it again because I'd gotten some things wrong. That was no fun, but it was still over in 4 months. So I didn't suffer for too long. Yeah.
Did you have trouble sleeping? Were you obsessed with it? I mean, I know you were freaked out about the COVID, but
no, I woke up in the middle of the night and made notes, and I never actually got up and worked in the middle of the night because I'm very lazy, but I did get up and make notes. Yeah.
Okay. There's a question from Lori that I'm going to circle back to in a second, because I think this one folds in kind of nicely. So I don't know who's asking this, but somebody says, as somebody who grew up in the Puget Sound, I found your description of Seattle and Whidbey Island to be spot on. How did you expand on your locations?
Oh, well, that's that. I'm very happy to say that just before things shut down, I was in Seattle and Whidbey Island with my husband. He was doing an event there, and I was in the denial phase where I was thinking, it's going to be okay. Everybody else says it's going to be okay. We flew there, and then we went out to the islands, and I remember I was in this beautiful cafe in Whidbey Island, like out in the water, and I was writing an early chapter, and at the next table there was a group of people talking about this virus, and they were sort of saying, well, I guess it might be here already, this virus. And I was just vibrating in terror at the next table. But it felt nice to put Whidbey Island in there and Seattle in there. I mean, I love Seattle. Invite me to Seattle. I'll come back anytime.
And how do you handle locations generally? I mean, there are, I don't want to just name names, but there are various locations in the book. Have you been to those places? Do you look at photographs? Like, how do you kind of get that right?
I have spent a lot of time in Vermont. There's a lot of Vermont in this book. I've been to Athens, Georgia only once, but the internet is a great service to writers in this. I mean, one great thing about the internet is, you have characters eating lunch in a restaurant. You can see what they're ordering. I mean, it's I love that. It's
right. Okay, so somebody had a question about it's kind of the business. Lori says, I'm very excited to start the book. I am geriatric, newly retired, and trying to publish a book I've written. Had no idea how challenging to find an agent. How did you find the second voice for the character's book? We talked about that. In terms of the how do you find an agent question, I mean, obviously you can't answer that specifically, but, there is a lot of stuff in the book about publishing. And there's an agent character.
When people, say, oh, wow, you worked in the admissions office at Princeton, which is not exactly true. I was an outsider at Princeton. And there's, they would say, well, what book should I read? Because my kid is coming up into junior year or something. And I said, listen, there are 5 how to get into college books in admission, and it's a lot more fun to read. Sorry, it sounds like I'm trying to sell my own book, but yeah, it's pretty packed with information. And I guess I'm just thinking in response to this question, there is something in an early conversation between student and teacher, between Jake and Evan, where he basically says, there may be this perception that it's so hard to break through as a new writer, but in fact, it's a lot easier to break through as a new writer than it is to drag your less than stellar backlist into some editor's office and persuade them to publish your 3rd or 4th novel. So, you may be working on your first novel, but people want to discover a new writer, and readers want to discover a new writer. And, age aside, when you walk into an editor's office or an agent's office with a brilliant first novel, you represent not only that novel, but everything you might write next. So you're not in the worst position. You're in a much better position than I was.
Yeah, there's a huge currency in being undiscovered. I mean, and I loved, the agent character is just talking about the hand holding that she has to do of the different authors, and how it's really a lot like being a therapist sometimes. And it kind of made me cringe. Have you watched Call My Agent, the French series? So this is a Netflix series about these talent agents in Paris. I actually find it anxiety inducing because it makes me feel like they talk about their clients, often in glowing ways, but often in really complaining ways, like, so-and-so, she's bothering me again. She's never going to get work. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the idea that I would ever be that client, we've all been like, oh no, help me. I'm out of money, do something for me. It's not a very good way to be.
I have never turned to my agent or my editor for that kind of, off the clock, non-writing related hand holding. But on the other hand, it's like when you go for your mammogram, you're sitting there waiting, and they know you're waiting, and they don't keep you waiting any longer. So when
God, that's a great analogy. I never thought of that. They know. Right.
They know. I mean, that's why I keep going back to the same place every year. When I turn in a novel every 4 or 5 years, my agent does not keep me waiting. She reads it as fast as she can. If she can't read it right away, she says, I've got an 1,800-page manuscript that I have to read first, and that's fine. But they respect me enough to prioritize the work that I've turned in, and I respect them enough not to say, but tell me I'm the best, please.
Right.
So do that because I'm not. So you can object, Deb. I know you're on this call. That's not true at all.
So somebody is asking, will we be seeing the plot as a movie or miniseries? So you have had several projects made into films or television series. This seems an absolute slam dunk in that category. So are you able to talk about what might be cooking on that front?
Let me say that it is in process. I can't say anything about it. I'm very happy about the producer that it's with, and she has some great things planned, and none of it is anything I can say.
Okay. Somebody is asking, Jean, in a book talk, do you prefer answering the questions or asking them? And that's actually a great question because you're a great interlocutor. You do Book the Author, which is this wonderful book club sort of. You bring authors in to talk with people, to talk with sort of pop-up book clubs, and you're very well prepared, and you moderate the discussion and keep everything lively. So yes, do you like to ask the questions or be asked?
Weirdly, I think I prefer to be asked because I don't feel as much pressure to make it okay. So I was less nervous about this than I am about the events that I do. The company's called Book the Writer, and we have about 25, 30 events a year. And we have amazing authors, and we've been online for a year, but we will be returning to real rooms with real people in them, we hope this fall. So it's been fun during the pandemic to do this kind of book talk with readers so that readers can ask the author's questions.
Yeah, and it's a great thing, I have to say, as an author. You've had me a few times, and I've been in the group a few times, just to have people have an organized conversation. I think authors really appreciate that because it doesn't, often these things get sort of freewheeling, and then the author has to kind of has to guide the discussion for herself. And so it's Book the Writer. It's a great,
we also require everybody reads the book beforehand, which really changes the whole temperature of the thing. There's no, where do you get your ideas and what's your book about?
That's true. Very, very, very informed question. Very smart. Yeah. I shouldn't say women. It's not just women. There's
women. I don't know. I'm so thrilled. We had
very high quality
a month ago with his memoir, A Moral Man, and for once there, it was more than half guys. So that was really fun. He was what an interesting book that is.
So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the HBO series. What was that like to see your book made into something that was so prominent? That was based on the novel You Should Have Known, and then it was adapted into the HBO streaming series The Undoing with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant. So talk about what that was like.
Well, it was not my first go around with adaptation. That was Admission. And I learned from my experience with Admission, which was a wonderful experience. Paul Weitz directed it, and Karen Croner out there in LA wrote the screenplay. The first time you're handed the screenplay of your book, you may want to take to your bed. It's quite a shocking experience. But, you move through that. And I think because of that, I was more prepared the second time to just kind of let it roll off me. And it didn't hurt that it was David E. Kelley, who is, of course, a master at what he does. He told me right from the get-go that this was a different take on the situation. My novel is not a whodunit. There is no doubt who did it. I was not interested in who did it. I was interested in the effect of the act specifically on the Grace character. He said, we're casting Hugh Grant as the husband. You don't cast Hugh Grant to play a role that is not there. I mean, Hugh Grant's character is barely in my book. So I knew that it was going to be a very different story being told, and I thought they did a great job. I didn't know who did it. I was in suspense along with everybody else.
Really?
Absolutely. I mean, I had seen the first 5 episodes, but they did not want to share that last episode.
Wow.
Very, very buttoned down about it. And we were, on our couch in upstate New York watching it with everybody else. And I was happy with the ending because I felt kind of vindicated, actually. I felt that they'd returned to the novel in a way.
So we have a few minutes left. So if there are any more questions, please jump in. I'm always curious. One of the dynamics in the novel has to do with social media. We're not going to say too much, but there is some intrusion into this character's life via various social media platforms. I mean, how has the experience of just writing and being an author changed over the last couple decades for you? I mean, you've been at this for a long time, so you've experienced publishing something before the age of social media and comments and all that, and now here we are. So do you find yourself having kind of anticipatory anxiety in different ways than you maybe would have 15, 20 years ago?
I remember the first, civilian reviews on Amazon, and the suddenly, that expression, everybody's a critic. Suddenly everybody was a critic, and they could have read the book or not read the book or heard about the book or gotten misinformation out of the book. It didn't matter in the eyes of Amazon. They were all equally valid. And that, that's hard to adjust to, because before Amazon, to review the book, you had to be a book reviewer, and you had to, tell the publication that you didn't know the author, you didn't have any connection to the author. At least that's what I had to do when I was reviewing a book. So you didn't know who was reviewing you and what.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't like you. Maybe they went to kindergarten with you. You didn't know. Do I think it's good that people should be allowed to publish their opinions? Absolutely. Why shouldn't they? But, we've all had to get a much thicker skin than, you already needed a thick skin to be a writer. But, it's a little harder now.
I mean, I thought it's interesting you say you participate in Goodreads. I mean, Goodreads is notoriously a toxic sludge pit of
Well, I don't.
Civilian reviews. That's a very very diplomatic characterization.
Well, I don't participate in that. I don't post reviews. I merely use Goodreads as a kind of fantasy bookshelf. And if it hadn't been for Goodreads, I would not have been able to whittle down. You can't see my bookshelf, but I'm in a room full of books, and it relieved me of the need to keep every book that I have read, because of, on Goodreads I can have like an image of it.
Oh,
yeah. So it's been a good thing in my life, but I've been very, very reassured over the last couple of months by the reviews that have been posted on Goodreads by people who have seen early copies of the plot. They really like it, and it's, I'm a kind of a self-flagellating kind of person, and it's very hard for me to say this, but they really like this book, and it's been wonderful to see this, and I believe them when they tell me that they really like it. I have become very familiar with the term slow burn, which is a term I had never heard before. I would say the term is used in 90% of these Goodreads reviews. I don't know if it's because they've seen it in other ones, but yes, I now know what a slow burn is.
Wow.
But I'm okay with that. I mean, I have always thought that my books are a little bit like a roller coaster, and a roller coaster begins with a long climb uphill. I mean, it doesn't just start with a lot of swishing around. So that's okay with me. I am fine with forcing people to wait for that thing.
Wow, I'm not surprised it's getting good reviews, because it's really captivating. Okay, well, this may be, I guess we have to wrap it up in a few minutes here, but this is a great question from Christina. What do you think of political figures and news figures jumping into fiction writing? And I would add actors, Hollywood actors as well. David Duchovny has published a couple of novels. I'm trying to think of who else. We're used to seeing people writing their memoir, their autobiographies and such. But what do you think of the kind of forays into fiction writing? Bill Clinton, Jake Tapper. Yes, somebody is telling me. Yes, they have novels. Okay. Yes, you're right.
We actually did a pop-up book group with David Duchovny. We've done two, in fact, over the years. We had one about 6 weeks ago, and there was a really interesting conversation about that book, Truly Like Lightning. David Duchovny is a good writer, and he's a guy who has a lot on his mind, and he wants to work it out in fiction. And, his book was very good. So I have no problem with the David Duchovnys. I think, the Paris Hiltons maybe not so great, but
he has a novel.
Well, didn't she, have a novel written under her name or something?
Oh, I don't know. Okay.
At some point, you're right. It became part of this sort of bouquet of accoutrement of a modern celebrity. You had your candle line, and you had your your perfume, and you had your novel. So I don't know, but I don't know that anybody really aspired to write literature. David Duchovny's quite a good writer. So.
Well, he's a smart guy. Oh yeah. So Christine, just so you know, Jean. So today you've got your competitors on your fellow pub date authors are Jake Tapper, new book released today, and Stacey Abrams.
I know.
Yep.
I know, it's great. I can't wait to read her book. I read Jake Tapper's first novel. I thought it was very good. But hey, Jake Tapper went to Dartmouth. I went to Dartmouth. I'm sure he got a really good education at Dartmouth. I don't know where he finds the time.
I know exactly. He wasn't hiding in his cabin during COVID.
No.
We know where he was.
We know where he was
this time.
Even Chris Cuomo, he was in his basement, but we know why he was in his basement.
That's right. Okay. Well, I don't know. Is there any? Is Maggie going to come back? I'm not sure. What we're supposed to be doing. We have a few. Oh, there you are. Okay. I mean, is there anything else you want to say, Jean? Just, is there anything we missed?
It's been a happy publication day for me. And I have had such a wonderful experience with Celadon and Macmillan. It's been wonderful to be reunited with my editor, Deb Butter, and Jamie Robb, and everybody there. They've hired just the most wonderful women to work there, and they're just fantastic. So
Macmillan is the publisher in the book, though, right?
It is. I mean, like what? At one point, when I wrote Admission, I had made it about another Nassau college, and then I thought, this is ridiculous. Everybody knows it's Princeton. It's going to be
It's
Princeton.
funny. Is it giving them heart palpitations though? The having to see their own company go through this trauma.
Changed it, but I think they thought it was funny. So
it's just very funny. Okay. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Good luck.
It's for doing this.
Such a fun
Before
book.
we go, I just wanted to show this because I'm a fan of Megan's podcast, and this is my Nuanced AF T-shirt that I
Yes.
got from her merch line.
Thank you.
And I love your podcast. And
Thank you. Yeah, I realize I don't know if people are seeing for just if in case you're confused, this is not a conversation for my podcast. I am signed in on Crowdcast under my podcast name. So if for some reason you're seeing that, that's the only reason. This is a Book Soup event. This is not my podcast. But thank you. Thank you for being a supporter. This is what happens when you're a writer. You have to pivot and go into the podcast and then merch business. So I never knew I'd be spending all this time evaluating, different kinds of garment fabrics and dyes and
this is very
riveting stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a wrap on our presentation. Thank you to all of our guests and to all of you who tuned in this evening. We're greatly appreciative of everyone's time and your support of independent bookstores. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button that reads The Plot directly below the viewer screen. Remember that these books will come with signed book plates while supplies last. If you'd like regular updates on our upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast and subscribe to our newsletter. Have a safe evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Megan.
Good night, Jean.
Good night.
Thank you so much, Maggie.
Thank you. Good night.